Hi everyone, this video is all about planned ignoring. In one of my classes the other day, a few students asked what I thought about this strategy, if I liked it, if I used it, under what conditions it works best. So I thought I'd record a brief video overview to talk about planned ignoring. So let's start by defining planned ignoring. Then I'll give you two conditions in which it can work really well, and two things to look out for, two things to avoid doing when implementing planned ignoring procedures. So as the name suggests, we are conceptualizing and consistently implementing a plan to ignore a behavior using planned ignoring. So probably the most common example in which teachers would use planned ignoring, we have a student calling out for attention, or maybe we're redirecting them and they mumble underneath their breath because in the past, when they've done that, we've gotten into kind of a back and forth confrontation. They've gotten tons of attention that way. So regardless of what the behavior is, whether it's a student muttering something under their breath, calling out without permission, we don't respond. We have a plan and we follow through with that plan to ignore that behavior. That is planned ignoring in a nutshell. Two conditions in which planned ignoring can work really, really well. The first of which is if the function or root cause of the behavior is access to attention. So in other words, if the behavior is happening because that student is attempting to access our attention, planned ignoring functions as an extinction procedure. We are discontinuing access to reinforcement contingent on the behavior that's been reinforced in the past. So they're calling out to get our attention. They're muttering something underneath their breath to get our attention. We ignore. That can be really, really effective because we're discontinuing reinforcement contingent on those behaviors. Another condition in which planned ignoring can work really, really well is when we implement planned ignoring as part of a multi-element treatment package. So in other words, yes, we ignore problem behavior, but if that student is still trying to get our attention, they have alternative means of accessing our attention. We embed opportunities to respond during lectures, cooperative learning, think, pair, share opportunities. We greet students at the door, thank them for their attendance at the end of the day, interact with students during non-instructional times. Use proximity control to check in with students. In other words, students have frequent opportunities to access the attention they're seeking without calling out or muttering underneath their breath or whatever other behaviors warranting the planned ignoring procedure. Okay, two things to look out for. If the function of the behavior is not attention, planned ignoring is unlikely to be effective. So if the behavior is being maintained by access to tangibles, they're using technology without permission, or if it's avoidance escape maintained, they are leaving the classroom without permission because they're trying to avoid or escape tasks and activities. Planned ignoring essentially allows students to access that reinforcement they're looking for, and they're unlikely to discontinue that behavior through planned ignoring. So, in other words, if we are ignoring the behavior, they still get access to that technology. They still get to avoid or escape those tasks if they're wandering in the hallway. So if the function is not attention, if it's tangibles or avoidance escape, planned ignoring is unlikely to function as an effective intervention because it's not meeting the root cause of the behavior. The other thing you want to look out for, and I want to close with this, we ignore the behavior, not the student, through planned ignoring. So in other words, if we have a student who's calling out for attention, we ignore the calling out behavior, not the student. So if that student raises their hand, I call on them right away. If that student walks into my classroom, I greet them just like any other student. So we ignore the calling out behavior, not the student. I hope that is a helpful overview of planned ignoring.